Fight fans around the world, are you ready for the ultimate knockout experience? If you're a true lover of the sweet science, craving in-depth analysis, exclusive interviews, and the latest updates from the world of boxing, look no further. Ringside Boxing is a proud sponsor of the Zapata brand boxing podcast to deliver knockout deals with every episode. Visit ringside.com/podcast and unlock a jaw-dropping 40% off selected brands. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just stepping into the ring for the first time, Ringside Boxing has something for everyone. Don't miss out on this incredible deal. Elevate your boxing experience with Ringside. Ringside, the best in boxing. Okay, well, this Saturday, March 30th, here at 8 p.m. on ppv.com, my next guest is hosting the live chat on ppv.com of Tszyu as he squares off against the now replacement Sebastian Fundora right here live on ppv.com. And my guest is the legendary Jim Lampley. Jim, how are you?
I'm very well, George. How are you?
Great. And you know what? To say it's an honor to speak with you, I just quickly want to go back to a backstory here. When I used to train in North Jersey at boxing, I'm going to date myself a little bit. I used to have a cassette recorder, Walkman, and I used to record your fight blow by blow. And as I was jogging, I would listen to it as if you were calling my fights. Best one was George Foreman versus Evander Holyfield, because you used the name George a lot, and it would give me motivation, and I would visualize my fights. So for that, I thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I am pleased to have been used in any way that was useful to you.
It certainly was.
You know, obviously, a television blow-by-blow is not continuous like a radio blow-by-blow. So I hope that your jogging, working out, whatever, was not in some way inconvenienced by the stretches of silence when I had nothing to say.
No, because of the fans. You'd have the fan background noise, and it would give me a motivation. And again, I was big in visualization, and it would help me watch.
And by expert commentators, and occasionally Larry saying something that would slow down your running cadence, or at least I presume so. Larry would appreciate that.
Yeah. And speaking of Larry, he would always say boxing is the theater of the unexpected. And a few weeks ago, we were expecting Keith Thurman to come back after a 2-year hiatus, approximately, against a surging Tszyu. Now, non-title fight, catch weight. Now, fast forward 2 weeks, we have Sebastian Fundora coming off a knockout loss, and only in boxing can you come off a knockout loss and go into a unification bout this Saturday on ppv.com. How did this come apart? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, not only coming off a knockout loss, but coming off a knockout loss and arriving in a situation where some people who follow boxing, myself included, are saying, actually, the throw-in last-minute substitute opponent is a more difficult opponent for Tszyu than the one who was originally intended. I didn't really know when first I heard about it whether to take Keith Thurman against Tszyu seriously, because I think of Keith Thurman as at best a part-time fighter at this point. It would have been his second meaningful pro fight in 5 years. There was no reason in the world to think of him as legitimately competitive against Tszyu, or at least that was my view of things. Now you've got Tszyu going in against a fighter for whom he has not specifically prepared or trained until the last several days, who is 6 feet 5.5 inches tall, fighting in the 154-pound weight class. Needless to say, you don't find a lot of nearly 6 feet 6 inch 154-pound fighters. So I can't imagine that Tszyu has been in the ring with somebody before who in some way approximated or duplicated what Fundora physically brings to the fight. On the other hand, Fundora was knocked out in his last appearance against Brian Mendoza. So on that basis, you say to yourself, well, this isn't all that dangerous for Tszyu. But I think of it as a more dangerous assignment than Thurman. I had it in my head that Thurman was just fighting for the money.
Right. And that was the one question I was going to ask you. Let's go on a business aspect first. This actually, just because they drop out the name of Thurman, I think he was the more viable financial commodity in this fight.
Recognizable.
Tszyu
to put a recognizable American name on his resume. A guy who has previously held the title, a guy who who fought against Manny Pacquiao. There were all sorts of good reasons for Tszyu to want to be fighting Keith Thurman. There are far fewer good reasons for him to want to be fighting Sebastian Fundora.
Do you think at all? Okay, so now that we look at it the business perspective, diehards like myself thought this is a better fight to begin with. It's a better fight. But do they say this could be a slippery banana peel here for Tszyu at all? Do you have any?
The
any
sport
questions?
is full of unexpected results. Yordenis Ugas against Manny Pacquiao. Did anybody pick Andy Ruiz to knock out Anthony Joshua when he was a last-minute substitute for Jarrell Miller? I think there are a lot of situations over the years in boxing, I could go on and on, where the last-minute throw-in opponent was somebody whom the public didn't know that much about, but who came up with a big performance and upset the odds and won the fight. It's not at all out of the question here.
Okay, so I know you've covered Tim's father, Tszyu, at the time that you were coming through there. You'd seen many of his fights, most notably Zab Judah's fight with him. What's your opinion on Tim Tszyu's star power as compared to his father's? Now Tim is very big in Australia right now, but where do you see the potential of his star power as opposed to someone right now like someone who isn't as, because we need a star in this business right now. Where do you see him star power wise as opposed to his father?
You know, Kostya Tszyu's biggest chance to become, quote, a star in the United States arrived when he came to HBO and achieved a primary fight presence on HBO the night that we were going to televise his title defense on the island of San Martin against an American journeyman puncher named Vince Phillips. And we were all set, Larry and George and I, to begin lionizing Kostya Tszyu and talk about all of the great things he had done and could do in the sport. And Vince Phillips landed one sizzling right hand and knocked him out. Because of the travel circumstances of the fight, I never sat down in a fighter meeting with Kostya. I didn't meet Kostya. I didn't have any personal information to relay about Kostya. It was almost a bizarre gift to me that Vince knocked him out in the first round so that the fight couldn't go forward for 8, 10, 12 rounds, and I would be demonstrated not to have known anything much about Kostya Tszyu. We didn't have a sit-down meeting with him face-to-face on St. Martin, which was normally the case for all of the fighters that we covered. So that was a highly unusual circumstances. You say, technically correct, that I covered Kostya Tszyu. Yeah. I watched him for about 2 minutes in the first round in San Martin against Vince Phillips. I watched him eat a right hand and not get up. And that was my entire experience. Tim Tszyu is a different story. He's already had some exposure to American television audiences. He's Australian bred. He's handsome. He's a boxer puncher, which is the most popular style in the sport. Tim Tszyu can become a star, and he can conceivably enter into the pound for pound discussion, which at this moment, in my view, revolves around Terrence Crawford aging out and Canelo Alvarez aging out. So there's a space there in the pound for pound discussion. Who's going to walk into it? Tszyu is one of several candidates to become a part of that discussion.
Well, as you pointed out there, Terrence Crawford being the top pound for pound, in my opinion, also. Rumor has it, let's hypothetically, going forward, again, you can't predict what's going to happen here this Saturday night. Tim Tszyu wins.
He gets a chance to fight Terrence Crawford.
Terrence Crawford would be the one out. Would you, if that match comes together, would you indeed say the person out of those two who win would now be, because I think Canelo is aging out. I think he has about 1 or 2 left, and then he would move on. But Tim Tszyu would have a whole continent behind him, really. I mean, he got some fans down there in Australia. Would he be the next face of boxing? Could you see that if he were to pull off a fight with Terrence Crawford?
It's hard for a non-American fighter to be, quote, the face of boxing because of the way the media system works. It's getting easier for that to be the case because global media are replacing national media more and more every day as we go forward. Yes, there's There's certainly an opportunity for Tszyu to become a centerpiece in the discussion over global pound-for-pound supremacy if he gets the opportunity to fight Terrence Crawford and beats Terrence Crawford. But those are two pretty big steps.
Those are large steps to do. Let's go continue on the card on Saturday night there. You also have probably, I think, the people's main event. Rolly Romero versus Cruz. What do you see in this? This is going to be, I think, fireworks galore here. What's your opinion on this fight here, and how do you think it goes down?
Well, if it's a violent puncher's fight, then you might favor Pitbull. But if it's a boxing match, I think you favor Romero. He's the more active fighter and seems to have the greater all-around skills. I think that most of the buildup that I've read is written from the perspective that Romero is the fighter to beat, favorite in the fight. So I'm looking at it that way as we go forward.
Do you see this fight projecting one of those two into the winner of the Haney-Garcia sweepstakes if that fight does come off?
If that fight does come off, obviously the winner of the Haney-Garcia sweepstakes is going to be able to pick and choose from a variety of possible opponents, and he may not be picking the toughest possible matchup. So we have to see how those two fights turn out and who looks good in what way before we determine what business is likely the product.
Last couple things, Jim, and I appreciate your time here. PPV.com, which is broadcasting this as an on-demand pay-per-view where you don't have to buy subscriptions, you don't have to do all the other stuff. But the caveat of this that I've been involved in the chat, I've spoken to you in the chat, you with Kevin Ioli 2 weeks ago there with the Joshua fight, and the one prior to that. Now, when someone gets onto this in demand, they go right into a chat room. I see it. How is that different? Do you feel? I think you're getting more value per se than what you get from. You're getting value. You're getting Jim Lampley, Kevin, Lance Pugmire. This week would be Lance Pugmire. What do you see the value there for them to communicate with you, interact with you? Tell us about that and how it first came up and approach to you.
It's a new medium of communication. I was out of television because HBO's new owners, cell phone salesman from Dallas, decided that HBO didn't need or want to carry boxing anymore. So that was the end of the HBO boxing telecast. I had no idea whether I was going to be going forward in any media capacity relative to the sport. I was here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, teaching a course in evolution of storytelling in American electronic news media to seniors and graduate students. One of the things that we constantly talked about in my course was how changes in technology, changes in business practices, changes in personnel alignment, et cetera, could lead to new ways of telling stories. And that's exactly what this is. I am now involved in a new way of telling a story. People come up to me on the street and say, okay, I see you're doing this with ppv.com. How do I listen to you? And I say, well, you can't listen to me. It's not my voice. I am typing text into a computer, and you join this chat stream, and you too can type text into a computer, and you can respond to what I say, or to what Lance Pugmire says, or to what any other viewer says in relation to our ongoing chat about the fight. It's a new way of sharing communication with each other during the fight, and it's the product, of course, of the ongoing evolution of technology, particularly in this case, text messaging. So you're hearing my voice here today. PPV.com consumers don't hear my voice on fight night. They see my words in text, and they can kick back against me or Lance Pugmire or anybody else who takes part in the stream.
And I think that is a very, very, very powerful and valuable asset to ppv.com. I mean, how
many people do you know who text all day and don't make any phone calls? It's an extremely popular method of communication. And that's now what Lance and I and Kevin, when he's there, are doing with regard to prize fights.
And one last question, Jim, before I wrap this up. And again, I appreciate your time. HBO went out, Showtime. We're now doing streaming, which is probably going to be the media where they go. In the next 5 years, I always go 5-year intervals and do it in my business, and I think most people do in their business. In 5 years, are you comfortable with the way that boxing is going per se because of the lack of big fights? I mean, in the 90s and 2000s, we had big fights monthly. Are you comfortable by saying in the next 5 years, boxing is in good hands?
No, I don't understand. Well, beginning with the fact that I still to this day do not understand why HBO's new owners felt it was better for HBO not to continue covering live prize fighting. And now Showtime has gone the way of All Flesh. It seems to me to be an increasingly disparate colonization of the sport, breaking it up into smaller and smaller multiple entities, as opposed to everybody meeting at a crossroads for a showdown and a big event. I could be wrong, but I see fewer giant boxing events in the future, and those that do take place might be taking place for audiences who are less and less likely to understand and fathom what boxing really is. So, based on what I'm seeing right now, I'm not optimistic, but I'm not what's at stake. I'm an elderly viewer, way beyond the median age. I am not the kind of person who is going to fuel whatever is the boxing economic base in the future. People who engage in, for instance, social media are more important than me because the sport is achieving some of its profile via what is said and exchanged on social media. I'll never be there. And therefore, just as I am a part of the past with regard to my voice going into a microphone and calling the fight, I'm probably a part of the past in relation to the continuing media evolution of big time boxing.
And it's a shame because what you guys did so well, which drew all the audience in, was your vignettes that you did. The tell a story.
Tell a story.
I said it all the time. It's not as expensive anymore as you think. They did that, and I had George Djokovic on not long ago yesterday, who worked at HBO Sports, and he was one of the lead producers there. And to put those stories together, and you get invested in a fighter, that brings you to the pay-per-view. I don't know why they got away from that, Jim. And it's something that you're the voice of my childhood, and it goes away. It's like, it's almost like a part of you is going away.
Don Dunphy was the voice of my childhood. I attempted to emulate him. I worked at ABC Sports for the first 13 years of my network television career until somebody, an incoming executive, assigned me to boxing as a means of getting rid of me. He thought that it would destroy my career. I wound up working on HBO. Lots of unexpected steps along the rocks atop the stream for me to get to where I ultimately got, but none of them were fail-safe predictable. We didn't know what was going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And I don't expect to be the person who will figure it out because I can't figure out what has happened in the recent past.
Well, Jim, we're going to wrap this up, but I could tell you, where can they reach you first? Where can they reach you on any social media platforms other than ppv.com this Saturday night?
No, they can reach me on ppv.com this Saturday night. And that's, I mean, I'm sure that there are ways and means of finding out my email address via certain tributaries on the web, but I do not do social media, so I am a dinosaur. You can't find me on any of the social media platforms you might name.
Well, I could tell you, Jim, to say that I am honored. If you would have told me in the late 90s, early 2000s that I would somehow get to have a conversation with Jim Lampley, I would have said you're crazy. I am just a dumb bagel guy who happened to get into a podcasting and going into a means of communication with people and having conversation. I was nice enough to a certain amount of people that I got forward, and was lucky enough to get in contact with a Fred Sternberg, and he hooked us up, connected us together. And I am forever grateful that you were giving me your time to come on my show.
Say hello to George Djokovic for me.
I will.
He's an old and trusted colleague.
He's a good friend of mine. He's a great guy. Always there when you need him. But that being said, Jim, I appreciate your taking your time out. I know you got a busy schedule. ppv.com this Saturday night. Join in the live chat. It'll be Jim Lampley and his friend Lance Pugmire doing the play-by-play there. And you can also ask questions and interact with them right there on ppv.com. Thank you very much, Jim.
My privilege. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Zapata Brand Podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and listen where all podcasts are available.